This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We're broadcasting on 800 stations on Pacific and NPR and low-power FM and college and community radio stations on public access TV and PBS TV stations and both TV satellite networks, Dish Network, Channel 9415, Free Speech TV, 9410 Link TV, and on Direct TV, Channel 375. And we're video and audio podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are also available in Spanish for any radio station to take, as over 250 are. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, 2009 was one of the bleakest years in memory for the news industry. One count found that 142 daily and weekly newspapers closed down, nearly triple the number in 2008. Colorado's oldest newspaper, the Rocky Mountain News, shut its doors last February. The nation's oldest gay and lesbian newspaper, the Washington Blade, abruptly closed in November. The Seattle Post-Intelligencer scaled down to web-only publication. The Christian Science Monitor became a weekly publication. Many other news organizations slashed the size of their newsrooms. An estimated 90,000 workers lost their jobs last year in the newspaper, magazine, and book publishing industry. Our next guests argue that journalism should be seen as a public good, that the government should help save American journalism by granting more subsidies to newspapers and media outlets. Robert McChesney and John Nichols make their case in a book titled The Death and Life of American Journalism, The Media Revolution That Will Begin the World Again. They argue that government subsidies for journalism have a long history in the United States, dating back to the founding of the country, when newspaper and journal publishers received large printing and postal subsidies.
Robert McChesney and John Nichols write, quote, "Like all public goods, we need the resources to get it produced. This is the role of the state in public policy. It'll require a subsidy and should be regarded as similar to the education system or the military in that regard." Well, Bob McChesney and John Nichols join us here in New York. Robert McChesney is a professor at the University of Illinois. John Nichols is the Washington correspondent for The Nation magazine. Together, they helped found the media organization Free Press. Their new book is called The Death and Life of American Journalism, The Media Revolution That Will Begin the World Again. Welcome both to Democracy Now! Bob McChesney, the media revolution that will begin the world again?
Well, that's a quote from Tom Paine, because we think we're in a moment of crisis right now for journalism, not just the sort of the long-term crises we often talk about and you chronicle on this program, but really a free-fall collapse in which in the next few years the decisions we make will determine whether we even have journalism as it's been known traditionally. The business model that has supported journalism for the last 125 years in this country is disintegrating. There will be some advertising, but much less. There will be some circulation revenues, but much less. And if we're going to have journalism in this country, it's going to require that there be public subsidies to create an independent, uncensored, nonprofit, non-commercial news media sector. And we argue in the book, as you said, that we actually have a very rich tradition of this. The first 100 years of American history, the founders did not assume the market would give us journalism. There's no such assumption at all. They understood it was the first duty of a democratic state to see that a vibrant, independent, uncensored fourth estate exists.
And in terms of it's not just in the early years of the Republic, obviously, but the government has helped to subsidize research into all the different technologies, whether it was the telegraph, whether it was radio, whether it was the Internet, all of the work that was done by the National Science Foundation to fund the development of the Internet. So there is a long tradition of this. But then why is there so much resistance now to saying, well, if journalism is in trouble, what should be the government's role?
Well, I think the most important thing that we bring out in the book, perhaps the vital message, is that there is a hidden history of the First Amendment, a history that was really stolen from us as we entered into a commercial age in the last century, century and a half. At the founding of the Republic, there was a deep understanding on the part of the founders that if you promised people freedom of the press, that was a wonderful notion, a great concept, but it was an empty promise, meaningless, if there wasn't a press. You know, you say, well, we're not going to censor you. Well, if there's nothing to censor, it doesn't matter. And so the founders understood, and well into the 19th century, there was an understanding that you never censored. You set up a landscape where independent journalism could be practiced and could come in all sorts of forms. Since then, some of that understanding has remained, the creation of some of the technologies you discuss. But the theft of that definition of freedom of the press, that it really is uncensored but also easily developed, and that when it's needed it comes into play, that's been stolen. And in the book we talk a lot about who really drove the development of an understanding of a press subsidy system. It wasn't Jefferson and Madison. They favored it. They thought it was a kind of a necessary evil. You got to have it. The people who drove it were the abolitionists, the people on the outside saying the original sin of the American experiment must be addressed. And they said, you know, we've got to have the resources to create independent, dissenting, small-town weeklies, and they did.
Go into that further. Who were these abolitionists?
People you know, people who died literally struggling to create independent weeklies, African freed slaves and runaway slaves, as well as Garrison himself, people who were killed at their presses. The fact of the matter is, at the founding of the country, we had a baseline press subsidy system. But it wasn't sufficient to really sustain. And so for decade after decade, there were congressional debates over how to extend it and whether to really take off the postal subsidies for the smallest papers, which circulated you know, at a local level. It was the abolitionists who fought for it, people like Garrison and others. But the fascinating thing is when you start to rip open this history, go to the truth, you find that Uncle Tom's Cabin has scenes where post offices are being attacked by Southern slavers who don't want the abolitionist press to be delivered. I mean, this is such rich, good history, and what we understand, what we come to realize is that we can create a system in this country today that allows the new abolitionist movements, the new dissenting movements, to have a voice. It won't be a dominant voice, it won't be as much as we'd like, but they can be in the play. But if we don't act now, we the people as citizens, we're going to end up in a situation where the vast majority of our news and information is packaged by power, by elites, by the same people who didn't want the abolitionists to have a voice 200 years ago.
Well, Bob McChesney, I'd like to ask you, we got reports today in today's papers. CBS News is laying off another 100 people. ABC News is expecting a new round of layoffs. There are those who argue, well, the Internet is providing now the kind of platform and news and information that the old media, radio, TV, and newspapers are no longer able to do so, and that the Internet will eventually supplant this. This is only a transition period. You argue in your book somewhat differently about the nature of newsrooms and their value vis-a-vis what's appearing on the Internet.
Yeah, it's a really important point, Juan, because, you know, everything's going digital. This program's largely received or will be digitally at some point in the very near future, not just on television and radio systems. And it's not a technological argument we're making about one technology supplanting another. We understand the digital times we're in. The argument that's crucial is whether the Internet's going to provide the basis for substantive journalism to replace what's disintegrating before us. And we go through this very carefully in the book, and I think it's obvious that if we want to look at actual resources, so people who get paid money to cover beats, who are accountable for them, who are competing with other journalists, who have proofreaders and copy editors and fact checkers, and institutions to support them in their work, they're just not happening online. The resources there barely exist. There are only a handful of journalists who can make a living doing journalism online. And what you have there, too, is if you're seeking out advertising support, it puts journalism in a very compromised position, because there's such a competition for the scarce ad dollars that really undermines the integrity of news that is essential for a credible free news system.
Well, and even within the old media, newspapers are still the, as I say, the fountainhead of news. I remember once in 1985, I was at the Philadelphia Daily News and Inquirer. We were on strike. And we were on strike for 5 weeks. And all my friends in TV came to me and said, when are you guys going to go back to work? Because without you, we don't know what to report. This is the TV news.
Hey, Juan, let me tell you how real that still is, and this is the scary part. There's a new Pew Center study out. They actually studied Baltimore. They looked at where all the original news stories came from. They looked at all the independent media, all the online, everything. They found that 96%, almost 96%, there's a little debate about the precise figure, but well over 90, came from old media, largely from the daily newspaper, the Baltimore Sun. But here's the scary part, the footnote. The Baltimore Sun is producing 73% fewer original news stories today than 20 years ago. So new media is commenting on old media, but it's not filling the void of news. Old media is giving us a lot less. And so you say, well, okay, come on, Pew Center folks, tell us, where is the news coming from? Who's generating it if it's not? Well, it's in there. 86% of the stories came in the form of public relations, either from government or from corporations. Only 14% produced by a reporter who went out and tried to speak truth to power. This is a scary zone we're entering.
So you talk about these press releases and